The key turned in the lock with more resistance than Russ remembered. 5 years building water treatment facilities across Southeast Asia had calloused his hands and sharpened his mind, but nothing had prepared him for the silence that greeted him. The house felt wrong. Not just empty abandoned. Russ stepped inside and set his single duffel bag on the hardwood floor. Dust particles danced in the afternoon light, streaming through windows that hadn't been cleaned in months. The living room furniture sat covered in a thin layer of neglect. His wedding photo with Delaney still hung on the wall, but the smaller frames, the ones with Sawyer's school pictures, were gone. Delaney. His voice echoed back, unanswered, that he walked through the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed with nothing inside except expired milk and takeout containers that had turned into science experiments. The breakfast bar where Sawyer used to eat his cereal before school was buried under unopened mail and empty wine bottles. Russ picked up one of the bottles. Expensive. The kind Delaney only bought when she wanted to impress someone. He climbed the stairs to Sawyer's room. The door was ajar. Inside, the bed was unmade, clothes scattered across the floor. But what made Russ's chest tighten was the layer of dust on everything. This room hadn't been lived in for weeks, maybe months. His son's inhaler sat on the nightstand, expired. Russ pulled out his phone and dialed Delaney's number. It went straight to voicemail. Her voice, bright and fake. "You've reached Delaney. I'm probably somewhere amazing. So leave a message and I'll get back to you when I can." "Where's Sawyer?" he said after the beep. "Call me back. Now." He hung up and tried again. Same result. The house phone had been disconnected. The utilities were still on, but barely. Past due notices covered the kitchen counter like fallen leaves. Russ sat down hard on the couch, his mind racing through possibilities. Delaney had always been flighty, but she wouldn't just disappear with their son. Would she? He called his lawyer, Markel. "Russ, Jesus, when did you get back?" "Today." "Delaney and Sawyer are gone. The house looks like it's been empty for months." "Slow down. What do you mean gone?" "I mean not here." No note. No explanation. Nothing. Her phone's going to voicemail. Markel was quiet for a moment. "Have you tried calling the school?" "School's out for summer." "Right. What about her mother? Loretta?" Russ had avoided thinking about his mother-in-law, but Markel was right. If anyone would know where Delaney had taken Sawyer, it would be her. "I'll try her." "Russ, if you think something's wrong, we can file a missing persons report. Let me make some calls first." But Loretta's phone also went to voicemail. This one was even more theatrical than her daughter's. Loretta Vaughn speaking. "I'm currently unavailable, but your call is important to me. Please leave a detail message, and I'll return your call as soon as possible." Russ didn't leave a message. He spent the next hour going through the house more systematically. Delaney's closet was half empty, but in a careless way, like she grabbed what she wanted and left everything else. Her jewelry box was gone. So were the expensive handbags she collected over the years in Sawyer's room. He found something that made his blood run cold. Hidden under the bed was a stash of granola bars and juice boxes, like his son had been hoarding food. Why would a 10-year-old need to hide food? Russ called the only number he had for anyone who might have seen Sawyer, recently Joe Adair, the pediatric nurse who'd been treating his son's asthma since he was diagnosed at age 6. "Russ, my God, you're back. How are you? I'm looking for Sawyer. He's not here, and neither is Delaney." The pause that followed lasted too long. "Joe." "Russ, I think you need to get to Seattle Children's Hospital. Right now." The ICU at Seattle Children's Hospital smelled like disinfectant and fear. Russ's boots squeaked against the polished floor as Joe led him down a corridor lined with rooms full of small bodies connected to machines. "He's been here for 3 days," Joe said quietly. "Severe asthma attack. We almost lost him." She stopped outside room 314. Through the glass, Russ saw his son lying unconscious, tubes running from his nose and mouth to machines that beeped steadily. Sawyer looked smaller than he remembered, thinner. His hair was longer, unwashed, and his skin had a grayish tint that made Russ's hands clench into fists. "Can I go in?" "Of course. You're his father." Russ pushed through the door and pulled a chair close to the bed. Sawyer's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but steady. There were bruises on his arms, not from medical procedures, Joe explained, but older ones. bruises from falling, from not being caught. The doctors found signs of malnourishment. Jo said, her voice carefully neutral. When was the last time you spoke to Delaney? 2 months ago. She said everything was fine. Said Sawyer was doing well in school. Jo's mouth tightened. School ended 6 weeks ago. He hasn't been to his pediatrician since March. His inhaler prescription ran out in April and was never refilled. Russ stared at his son's pale face. What triggered the attack? A neighbor found him collapsed on your front porch. He'd been outside for hours, apparently trying to get back inside. The neighbor said she'd seen him wandering around the neighborhood alone several times recently. Alone. Mrs. Patterson lives 2 houses down. She's the one who called the ambulance. She said she'd been worried about him for weeks, but didn't know who to call. Russ felt something cold settle in his stomach. Where's Delaney? We've been trying to reach her since he was admitted. Her emergency contact information is outdated. The address she gave is a P.O. box that's been closed for months. Jo pulled out her phone and showed him a photo. Mrs. Patterson took this yesterday when she came to check on the house. The photo showed their front door with a pile of takeout containers and empty bottles scattered on the porch. The lawn was overgrown. Newspapers yellowed in the driveway. How long has he been alone? We don't know. CPS is investigating. CPS, Child Protective Services. Russ, when we admitted Sawyer, he was wearing the same clothes he'd probably been in for days. He was dehydrated, underweight, and hadn't had his medication. We're required to report suspected neglect. Russ reached out and touched his son's hand. It was warm, but too thin. He could feel the bones beneath the skin. Has anyone contacted you? Jo asked. No, I just got back this afternoon. Good. You need to talk to Avery Redden. She's the CPS investigator assigned to Sawyer's case. She's been trying to locate next of kin. I'm his father. I know. But legally, since Delaney has primary custody and you've been out of the country, I never gave up my parental rights. No, but you'll need to prove that. And you'll need to show you can provide a stable home environment. Russ looked at his son again, the boy who used to build elaborate Lego structures and explain them in detail. The boy who knew more about marine biology than most adults. The boy who'd hugged him tight at the airport 5 years ago and made him promise to come back soon. When will he wake up? Soon. His vitals are stable. The medication is helping. But Russ, when he does wake up, he's going to need a lot of support. This kind of neglect, it leaves marks that don't show up on x-rays. Jo handed him a business card. This is Avery's number. Call her tonight. Don't wait. As she left, Russ pulled his chair closer to the bed and took Sawyer's hand in both of his. The machines continued their steady beeping, the only sound in a room that felt like the center of the world collapsing. Russ sat in the hospital cafeteria at 2 a.m., his laptop open on the plastic table. He'd called Avery Redden and left a message explaining who he was and that he needed to meet with her immediately. Now he was doing what he'd learned to do during 5 years of solving infrastructure problems in remote locations. Gather information that he started with Delaney's social media accounts. Her Instagram was set to public, a decision that was about to cost her everything. The photos told a story that made his blood turn to ice. June 15th. Delaney and Loretta at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Designer luggage and bright smiles. Caption: Mother-daughter adventure. Bali bound. Hashtag living my best life. Hashtag blessed. June 16th. Poolside cocktails at some resort. Delaney in a bikini, laughing. Caption: Day 1 in paradise. So needed this break. Hashtag self-care. Hashtag Bali vibes. June 17th. Spa day photos. Loretta getting a massage. Delaney with her feet in some kind of treatment. Caption: Pampered and perfect. This is what dreams are made of. Hashtag treatment. Hashtag mother-daughter. Russ checked the dates against what Jo had told him. Sawyer had been admitted to the hospital on June 18th. The neighbor found him collapsed on the porch on the evening of June 17th. He scrolled through more photos. Beach dinners, shopping trips, temple visits. Every single day documented with dozens of photos and captions about finding herself and deserving happiness. June 18th, a sunrise yoga photo. Caption: Grateful for this moment of peace. Sometimes you have to choose yourself. Hashtag yoga, hashtag sunrise, hashtag namaste. The timestamp on that photo was 6:47 a.m. Bali time. In Seattle, it would have been 2:47 p.m. the previous day, right around the time Mrs. Patterson found Sawyer unconscious. Russ screenshot every photo, every caption, every timestamp. Then he moved to Loretta's account, which was just as damning. The older woman had been documenting their girl's trip with equally shameless enthusiasm. But it was the comments that really told the story. Friends asking about Sawyer, wondering why they never saw him in photos anymore. Delaney's responses were masterclasses in deflection. He's with his dad. Russ had been in Thailand with no cell service for 3 weeks. He's at camp. It was only June 15th, and Sawyer had never been to any kind of camp. He's having his own adventure. Apparently, that adventure involved nearly dying alone. There were more photos. Braylon Court appeared in several of them, a man Russ didn't recognize, younger than Delaney, with the kind of artificial smile that spoke of someone who'd never worked a day of hard labor in his life. The photos of him with Delaney were intimate. Hands on her waist, drinks shared, sunset kisses. Russ saved everything to a cloud folder, then created backups. 5 years of dealing with corrupt officials and failing infrastructure had taught him that evidence disappeared if you didn't protect it properly. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Avery Redden, CPS. Got your message. Can you meet at the hospital at 8 a.m.? I'll be in the family conference room on the pediatric floor." Russ typed back, "I'll be there. I have information you need to see." He closed the laptop and went back to Sawyer's room. The night nurse, a kind woman named Patricia, let him pull a reclining chair close to the bed. "Any change?" he asked. "His breathing is improving. Doctor thinks he might wake up tomorrow." Russ settled into the chair and watched his son sleep. In the dim light, Sawyer looked even younger than his 10 years. There were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of weeks of poor sleep and stress. "You don't have to worry anymore," Russ whispered. "Dad's here now, and I'm never leaving again." But even as he said it, he was planning. Delaney had made a mistake by documenting her neglect so thoroughly. She'd made an even bigger mistake by thinking Russ wouldn't find out. She was about to learn that 5 years of solving impossible problems in impossible places had taught him things she couldn't imagine. And unlike the corrupt officials and incompetent contractors he'd dealt with overseas, Delaney was about to face someone who had access to the American legal system. Someone who understood exactly how to use it. Russ met with Markel Finn at 7 a.m. in the lawyer's downtown Seattle office. The building was glass and steel, designed to intimidate, and Russ appreciated that. He was done being patient. "Show me what you've got," Markel said, settling behind his desk with a cup of coffee that probably cost more than most people's lunch. Russ spread printed screenshots across the mahogany surface. Photos of Delaney and Loretta in Bali, time-stamped social media posts, medical records from the hospital, Mrs. Patterson's statement. Markel studied them carefully, his expression growing darker with each page. "This is bad, Russ. Really bad. It gets worse." Russ handed him another folder. "Bank statements. She's been using the joint accounts to fund this lifestyle. $15,000 in the last month alone. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, first-class flights. While your son was starving." Markel leaned back in his chair. "What do you want to do?" "Everything. I want her cut off financially. I want full custody, and I want her prosecuted. The financial part one can do today. I'll file an emergency motion to freeze all joint accounts and assets. Given the circumstances, any judge will grant it. How fast? I can have it filed by noon. The freeze will be effective immediately." "Good. The custody and prosecution pieces are more complicated. You'll need to coordinate with CPS, probably the district attorney's office." Russ checked his watch. "I'm meeting with the CPS investigator in an hour." "Perfect. Bring copies of everything. And Russ, yeah, document everything from here on out. Every conversation, every phone call, every interaction. If this goes to court, and you'll need to prove a pattern of behavior." "I plan to." Markel stood up and extended his hand. "Welcome home. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. I'm not sorry I'm back. I'm sorry I left." An hour later, Russ sat across from Avery Redden in the family conference room at Seattle Children's Hospital. Avery was a woman who looked like she'd seen too much but hadn't let it break her. Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct. Mr. Kessler, thank you for coming in. I understand you've been overseas. 5 years. Water treatment facilities in Southeast Asia. I got back yesterday, and you had no knowledge of your son's condition. Russ handed her the same folder of evidence he'd shown Markel. None. If I had, I would have been here immediately. Avery spread the photos across the table, her face carefully neutral as she examined each one. These are time-stamped. Yes. Cross-reference them with Sawyer's admission date. She did, making notes in a legal pad. Mr. Kessler, I have to ask, why did you leave your son for 5 years? Delaney asked for a divorce. She wanted primary custody, said she could provide better stability. I was traveling for work anyway, and I thought. He stopped. I thought I was doing what was best for him. You maintained contact. Video calls twice a week. Or tried to. The last few months, Delaney kept saying he was busy with school activities, sports, friends. Said he was thriving. When was your last conversation with Sawyer directly? Russ felt the guilt settle in his chest like a stone. March. Maybe April. And with Delaney. 2 months ago. She said everything was fine. Avery made more notes. Mr. Kessler, I need to tell you that this is one of the most clear-cut cases of neglect I've seen. Your son was found severely malnourished with expired medication after being left alone for what appears to be weeks. What happens now? I'm recommending immediate removal from the mother's custody. Given that you're the biological father and you're here now, the state would prefer to place him with you rather than in foster care. What I need to do, prove you can provide a stable home environment. Income, housing, medical insurance. The basics. Russ pulled out another folder. Employment contract with my new job. I start Monday as a senior engineer with Boeing. Salary documentation, health insurance information, background check results. Avery looked impressed. You came prepared. I spent 5 years learning that preparation prevents problems. What about housing? I'm staying in the family home for now. I'll find something more appropriate for Sawyer long term. The home, where he was neglected, I'm having it professionally cleaned and inspected. New locks, security system, full medical supply kit. Whatever he needs. Avery closed her folder. Mr. Kessler, I'm going to be honest with you. Your wife is going to return from Bali eventually. When she does, she's going to face some serious questions. Good. You sound angry. I am angry. Someone left my son to die while she got a tan. Channel that anger productively. Your son is going to need stability, not revenge. Russ met her eyes. He'll get both. At 3:47 p.m., Russ's phone rang. The caller ID showed Delaney's number. Where are you? She screamed before he could say hello. What did you do to my accounts? I can't access anything. Hello, Delaney. Nice to hear from you too. Don't you dare take that tone with me. I'm stuck in Bali with no money because of whatever sick game you're playing. Where's Sawyer? The pause lasted 3 seconds too long. He's fine. He's with friends. Which friends? That's none of your business. You left us, remember? You don't get to come back and make demands. He's in the hospital, Delaney. Another pause, longer this time. What? Sawyer is in the ICU at Seattle Children's Hospital. He nearly died 3 days ago from an asthma attack. The same 3 days you've been posting bikini photos from your vacation. That's impossible. He was fine when you what? When you left him alone to starve. I didn't leave him alone. He's been staying with, she stopped. Russ could almost hear her mind racing, trying to construct a lie that would hold up. With who, Delaney? You're lying. You're trying to manipulate me. Room 314. Seattle Children's Hospital. Pediatric ICU. Go see for yourself. I'm in Bali. I can't just... Then maybe you shouldn't have gone to Bali while your son was dying. The line went quiet except for the sound of her breathing, fast and panicked. The accounts, she said finally. You can't just freeze everything. I have rights. You had rights. Past tense. Russ, please. I can explain everything. It's not what it looks like. It looks like child neglect. It looks like abandonment. It looks like you chose your boyfriend and your vacation over your son's life. How do you know about... I know about everything, Delaney. Every photo, every lie, every dollar you spent while Sawyer was eating hidden granola bars. She started crying, the kind of theatrical sobs she'd always used when she wanted sympathy. Please don't do this. I made a mistake, but I'm his mother. You're a stranger who happened to give birth to him. A mother doesn't leave her child to die. I'm coming home. Good. Avery Redden with Child Protective Services wants to talk to you. So does the district attorney's office. The line went dead. Russ stared at his phone for a moment, then called Markel. She just called, panicked about the money, tried to lie about where Sawyer was. Well, I told her about the hospital. She hung up. Did she admit to leaving him alone? Almost. She caught herself. That's fine. We have enough without a confession. How's your son? Still sleeping, but the doctors think he'll wake up soon. Good. When he does, document everything he tells you about what happened. And Russ. Yeah, get ready. She's going to come back fighting. Sawyer woke up at 6:23 a.m. on June 21st. Russ was holding his hand when the boy's eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding his features as he tried to focus on the unfamiliar room. Dad. The word came out as barely a whisper, but it hit Russ like a physical force. Hey, buddy. I'm here. Sawyer tried to sit up, but the tubes and wires kept him tethered to the bed. Where am I? You're in the hospital. You had an asthma attack. I couldn't breathe. I kept trying to get inside, but the door was locked and I couldn't find the key and slow down. You're safe now. Sawyer's eyes darted around the room, taking in the machines, the 4-line in his arm, the oxygen tube in his nose. Where's Mom? Russ felt his jaw tighten. She's not here. Is she coming? I don't know. Sawyer nodded, and something in that small gesture told Russ that his son had learned not to count on his mother being there. Are you hungry? Yeah, really hungry. Russ pressed the call button for the nurse. Within minutes, Joe appeared with a breakfast tray and a smile that didn't quite hide her relief. There he is. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Tired and hungry. Well, we can fix hungry, but you need to eat slowly, okay? Your stomach needs to remember how to handle food. As Sawyer worked his way through scrambled eggs and toast, Russ asked gentle questions. Where had he been staying? How long had he been alone? When was the last time he'd seen his mother? The answers painted a picture that made Russ want to break something. Delaney had been going on trips for months, sometimes overnight, sometimes for days. She'd leave money for food delivery, but often forgot. When the delivery apps stopped working because the credit cards were declined, Sawyer had learned to stretch whatever was in the house. I saved the granola bars for when I got really hungry, he explained between bites. And there was peanut butter, but it ran out last week. What about your inhaler? It stopped working. Mom said she'd get me a new one, but she kept forgetting. Joe and Russ exchanged a look over Sawyer's head. Buddy, I need to ask you something important, Russ said. Did anyone else stay at the house? Any of Mom's friends? Sawyer shook his head. Sometimes Braylon came over, but Mom said I should stay in my room when he was there. Did he ever talk to you? Not really. He didn't like kids. At 10 a.m., while Sawyer was napping again, Russ met with Avery in the conference room. This time, she wasn't alone. A tall woman with graying hair and sharp eyes sat across from them. Mr. Kessler, this is Detective Linda Vasquez with the Seattle Police Department. She's investigating your son's case. Detective Vasquez shook his hand. Mr. Kessler, I need to ask you some questions about your wife's recent activities. Russ handed her the same folder of evidence he'd been carrying everywhere. Everything I know is in there. She studied the photos, making notes. This boyfriend, Braylon Court. What do you know about him? Nothing. I never heard his name until I saw him in these photos. And your wife never mentioned him? No, but we haven't spoken much in the last few months. Detective Vasquez pulled out her own folder. We've been doing some digging. Braylon Court, age 35, works in marketing for a tech startup. No criminal record, but he's been spending a lot of money lately on luxury items. Money that appears to have come from your joint accounts. He's been stealing from us. Your wife gave him access to the accounts. Legally, it's not theft, but it establishes a pattern of financial irresponsibility. Avery leaned forward. Detective Vasquez has some news about the district attorney's investigation. We're moving forward with criminal charges, Vasquez said. Child endangerment, criminal neglect, abandonment. The DA's office thinks they can make the charges stick. When? Your wife is scheduled to return for Bali tomorrow. We'll be waiting. Russ felt something cold and satisfied settle in his chest. Good. Mr. Kessler, I need to warn you that this is going to get ugly. Your wife will likely hire an expensive lawyer. They'll try to paint you as an absent father who abandoned his family. Let them try. They'll also go after your character. 5 years overseas, limited contact with your son. I have documentation of every attempted contact, every video call, every holiday gift I sent. Detective Vasquez smiled. You really do come prepared. I learned the hard way that documentation saves lives. That afternoon, Russ sat in Sawyer's room while his son drew pictures with crayons Joe had brought. The drawings were telling dark houses with small figures standing outside, locked doors, empty refrigerators. Dad! Yeah, buddy. Are you going to leave again? Russ set down the engineering journal he'd been reading. No, I'm staying right here. What about your job? The one with the water things? I'm done with that job. I have a new one here in Seattle. Sawyer continued coloring, but Russ could see the tension in his small shoulders start to relax. Dad! Yeah, I'm glad you came back. Me too. Dr. Sarachin's office was sterile and windowless, files stacked on every available surface. As Sawyer's primary care physician, she'd been treating him since he was a toddler, and the expression on her face told Russ everything he needed to know before she said a word. I prepared the complete medical records you requested, she said, handing him a thick folder. Mr. Kessler, I have to tell you that I've been concerned about Sawyer for months. Russ opened the folder and immediately saw the problem. Appointment after appointment marked no-show or canceled by parent. When was his last visit? March 15th. A routine checkup. Your wife brought him in, but she seemed agitated, impatient. She kept checking her phone, asking how long everything would take. What about his asthma management? Dr. Chun pulled out a separate file. That's where things get really concerning. Sawyer's asthma isn't severe, but it requires consistent medication. Preventive inhalers, rescue inhalers, action plans for emergencies. She spread out a timeline on her desk. Look at this pattern. January prescription filled on time. February, 3 days late. March, 1 week late. April never filled. May never filled. June never filled. She just stopped getting his medication. It appears that way. And it's not like the prescriptions are expensive or difficult to get. Any pharmacy would have filled them. Russ studied the timeline. What about the allergy specialist? Dr. Martinez has been trying to see Sawyer for 6 months. Your wife canceled 4 appointments and never rescheduled. For what? Sawyer's been developing new sensitivities. Food allergies, environmental triggers. Dr. Martinez wanted to do comprehensive testing and update his treatment plan. Dr. Chin pulled out another file. There's more. Last October, Sawyer came in with what looked like minor scoliosis. Common in growing kids, easily managed with physical therapy. I referred him to a pediatric specialist, and your wife refused the referral. Said she didn't want him labeled with a condition. Said physical therapy was for broken kids. Russ felt his hands clench. He needed treatment, and she refused it. I tried to explain that early intervention could prevent problems later, but she was adamant. Said she knew what was best for her son. Dr. Chin sat back in her chair. Mr. Kessler, I've been a pediatrician for 20 years. I've seen neglect, abuse, parents who are overwhelmed or under-resourced. This was different. How? Your wife had every resource available. Good insurance, financial means, access to excellent medical care. She chose not to use any of it. Why didn't you report it? I should have. I almost did several times. But she was careful never to miss the truly critical appointments, never to let things get bad enough to justify intervention. Until now, Russ looked through more records. Emergency room visits that ended with Delaney leaving before treatment was complete. Specialist referrals that were never followed through. A pattern of medical neglect disguised as being a busy parent. Doctor, I need you to be completely honest with me. How bad is Sawyer's condition right now? Physically, he'll recover. The malnourishment wasn't severe enough to cause permanent damage. His asthma is manageable with proper medication. The scoliosis hasn't progressed significantly. What about psychologically? Dr. Chin's expression grew sad. That's not my area of expertise, but I'm concerned. Chronic stress, fear, hunger, these things change how a child's brain develops. He's going to need support. Whatever he needs. Mr. Kessler, can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you stay away so long? Russ had been asking himself the same question for days. I thought I was giving them space to build a life. Delaney convinced me that my traveling was disruptive, that Sawyer would be more stable with routine. And you believe that? I want to believe it. I thought being a good father meant doing what was best for him, even if it meant being away. Dr. Chun handed him copies of all the medical records. Mr. Kessler, being a good father means being present, being involved, being there when your child needs you. I know that now. Don't make the same mistake twice. As Russ left the medical center, his phone buzzed with a text from Markel. Emergency hearing scheduled for tomorrow. Judge wants to review custody arrangements, given the circumstances. Be ready. He was ready. He'd been getting ready for this fight since the moment he saw his son lying unconscious in that hospital bed. Mrs. Patterson lived in a tidy craftsman house 2 doors down from Russ's place. She answered the door before he could knock a woman in her 70s with sharp eyes and the posture of someone who'd spent her life paying attention to details. You must be Sawyer's father. I'm Gloria Patterson. Thank you for calling the ambulance. You saved his life. She gestured for him to sit on her front porch. I should have called sooner. I kept thinking it wasn't my business, that surely his mother knew what she was doing. Tell me what you saw. Mrs. Patterson pulled out a notebook. I've been keeping track since April. Your boy started showing up in my yard, just sitting under the oak tree. At first, I thought he was playing some kind of game. She flipped through pages of careful handwriting. April 20th saw Sawyer walking around the neighborhood alone at 7 p.m. April 24th found him sitting on my porch, said he was locked out. May 3rd, he asked if I had any food. He asked you for food, said he was hungry and there wasn't anything at home. I gave him a sandwich and some cookies, told him to ask his mother to call me. Did she? No, but I started leaving snacks in a basket by my door. Granola bars, juice boxes, things a boy could grab without anyone noticing. Russ felt something break apart in his chest. He was feeding himself from your porch. I set up a little security camera after that, just to keep an eye on things. Mrs. Patterson pulled out her phone. I've got hours of footage. She showed him video after video. Sawyer walking around the neighborhood at all hours, sitting on curbs, sleeping in their backyard hammock, trying to climb over the fence to get into his own house. This one's from June 15th, she said, showing him a video time-stamped 3:47 p.m., the day his mother left for that trip. The video showed Delaney loading suitcases into an Uber, Loretta beside her. Sawyer stood in the doorway in pajamas, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. She just left him there. Didn't even say goodbye that I could see. Just got in the car and drove away. Mrs. Patterson showed him more videos. Sawyer trying to break into his own house through windows. Sitting on the front porch for hours. Walking to the corner store and coming back empty-handed because he didn't have money. This is the one from June 17th, she said, her voice quiet. The day I found him. The video showed Sawyer stumbling around the front yard, clearly struggling to breathe. He kept trying to get to the front door, falling down, getting back up. At one point, he sat down on the porch steps and just stayed there, his shoulders moving rapidly as he fought for air. I found him about an hour after this was recorded, Mrs. Patterson said. He was unconscious, barely breathing. Russ saved copies of all the videos to his phone, then uploaded them to his secure cloud storage. Evidence. Documentation. The truth. That evening, he drove to the King County Superior Court building and met with an attorney specializing in family law, Rebecca Morrison, a woman Markel had recommended specifically for cases involving child endangerment. Mr. Kessler, I've reviewed the materials you sent over. This is one of the most documented cases of neglect I've ever seen. What are my chances of getting full custody? With this evidence, I'd say 90% or better. The question isn't whether you'll get custody. It's whether your wife will face criminal charges. She should. I agree. But my job is to focus on what's best for Sawyer. Criminal proceedings can be traumatic for children. More traumatic than nearly dying from neglect. Rebecca smiled grimly. Point taken. Now, let's talk about your wife's likely defense strategy. She spread out legal documents on the conference table. She'll argue that you abandoned the family, that your absence forced her to make difficult choices. She'll claim you're an unfit parent who chose career over family. Let her claim that. She'll say the trip to Bali was a momentary lapse in judgment, that she arranged care for Sawyer that fell through. With who? That's exactly what we'll ask. And when she can't provide a name, address, or any documentation of this supposed care arrangement, her credibility will be destroyed. Rebecca handed him another folder. This is a complete financial analysis of your joint accounts. Your wife and her boyfriend spent over $40,000 in the past 3 months. Designer clothes, expensive restaurants, luxury travel, all while your son was rationing granola bars. $40,000, most of it in the 6 weeks before she left for Bali. She was liquidating assets, probably planning to file for divorce, and claimed she needed emergency support. Can we prove that? We can prove the spending pattern. We can prove the timing. A judge will draw the obvious conclusions. Russ's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Braylon. We need to talk. Things aren't what they seem. Meet me at Starbucks on Pine St. tomorrow at 2 p.m. He showed the message to Rebecca. Don't go, she said immediately. Why not? Because it's either a setup or an attempt to manipulate you. Your wife is probably coaching him on what to say. What if he has information that helps Sawyer? Then he can provide it through proper legal channels. Mr. Kessler, you're building an airtight case. Don't give them an opportunity to derail it. Russ deleted the message without responding. Nina Calver's office in the King County Prosecutor's building was smaller than Russ had expected, but everything about the woman behind the desk suggested competence. She was younger than he'd anticipated, maybe 45, with graying hair pulled back and eyes that had seen too much but still believed in justice. Mr. Kessler, thank you for coming in. I understand you have information relevant to the Delaney Von Kessler case. I have everything. Russ spent the next hour walking Nina through the evidence. Photos, videos, medical records, financial statements, witness testimony. She took notes carefully, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. This is comprehensive, she said finally. Almost too comprehensive. How did you compile all this so quickly? 5 years of infrastructure work in places where documentation meant the difference between success and failure. You learn to be thorough. Nina opened a legal pad and began sketching out a timeline. Let's talk about the criminal case. Child endangerment in the first degree, criminal mistreatment, abandonment of a dependent person. With this evidence, I can make all of those charges stick. What kind of sentence are we looking at? Depends on several factors. Your wife has no prior criminal record, which works in her favor. But the severity of the neglect, the duration, the financial resources available to her, all of that works against her. How long? If convicted on all charges, she's looking at 5 to 10 years. With good behavior, maybe parole in 3. Russ felt something cold and satisfied settle in his chest. Good. Mr. Kessler, I need to ask you something directly. Is this about justice for your son, or is this about revenge against your wife? What's the difference? Nina studied his face. Justice focuses on protecting the victim and preventing future harm. Revenge focuses on punishing the perpetrator. Then it's both. I can work with that. But I need you to understand that the moment this becomes about your personal feelings toward your wife, you become a liability to the prosecution. Meaning stay focused on Sawyer. Don't give interviews to the press. Don't post on social media. Don't do anything that lets the defense paint you as a vindictive ex-husband. I'm not interested in publicity. Good. Because your wife's lawyer will try to make this about a bitter custody dispute rather than child endangerment. Nina pulled out another file. I've been in contact with the Bali authorities. Your wife and her boyfriend are scheduled to return on a flight landing at Seattle-Tacoma tomorrow evening. We'll be waiting. What happens then? She'll be arrested on arrival. Booked, processed, arraigned. Given the severity of the charges and the fact that she fled the country while her child was hospitalized, I'll be requesting she be held without bail. Will you get it? Probably. Judges don't like parents who abandon critically ill children for vacation. Nina closed the file and looked at him directly. Mr. Kessler, I need you to understand something. This case is going to get a lot of attention. A woman leaving her child to die while she parties in Bali, it's exactly the kind of story the media loves. I don't want Sawyer's name in the papers. We'll do everything we can to protect his privacy. But you need to be prepared for this to become public. Let it become public. Maybe other kids in similar situations will get help. That's exactly the right answer. As Russ left the prosecutor's office, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: the satisfaction of a plan coming together. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every financial record pointed to the same inescapable conclusion. Delaney had chosen her boyfriend and her lifestyle over her son's life. Now she was going to face the consequences. His phone buzzed with a text from Joe. "Sawyer, asking for you. Can you come to the hospital?" Russ typed back, "On my way." As he drove through downtown Seattle, he thought about what Nina had said about justice versus revenge. Maybe she was right that there was a difference. But as far as Russ was concerned, watching Delaney face the consequences of her choices would serve both purposes perfectly. The text from Detective Vasquez came at 8:47 p.m. Flight landed. Making arrests now. Russ was sitting in Sawyer's hospital room, helping his son work on a puzzle. The boy had been making steady progress, eating regularly, breathing easier, even smiling occasionally. But he still startled at sudden noises and watched the door constantly, as if expecting someone dangerous to walk through it. "Dad? Who's texting you?" "Work stuff. Nothing important." But it was important. After 3 days of waiting, Delaney was finally back on American soil. And unlike her son, she wouldn't be sleeping safely tonight. 20 minutes later, his phone rang. "Markel. She's in custody. Booked at King County Jail on charges of child endangerment in the first degree, criminal mistreatment, and abandonment of a dependent person." What happened at the airport? According to Detective Vasquez, she came off the plane laughing with her boyfriend, completely unprepared. When they arrested her, she started screaming that it was all a misunderstanding, that you were lying to get revenge. What about Braylon? He wasn't charged with anything, but the police made it clear he should make himself available for questioning. Apparently, he claimed he had no idea she'd left the kid alone. Russ looked at Sawyer, who was focused intently on finding a puzzle piece that matched the edge of a lighthouse. "When's the arraignment?" "Tomorrow morning. Judge Morrison, 9 a.m. Nina Calver thinks the judge will deny bail." "I want to be there." "Are you sure?" "It might be better to." "I want to be there." "Okay. But Russ, prepare yourself. She's going to look different." Jail doesn't treat anyone kindly. After hanging up, Russ helped Sawyer finish the puzzle. It showed a lighthouse on a rocky coast, its beam cutting through a storm-dark sky. When they placed the final piece, Sawyer smiled, the first real smile Russ had seen from him since coming home. "It's fixed," Sawyer said. "Yeah, buddy, it is." The next morning, Russ sat in the back row of Judge Morrison's courtroom and watched his wife shuffle in wearing orange jail scrubs and handcuffs. Markel had been right, she looked different. The perfectly styled hair was stringy and unwashed. The expensive makeup was gone, revealing dark circles under her eyes. The confident posture had been replaced by something smaller, more frightened. "Good." The state of Washington versus Delaney Von Kessler, the bailiff announced. Nina Calver stood at the prosecutor's table, every line of her posture radiating competence and controlled anger. Across from her, Delaney's public defender, a tired-looking man named Richards, shuffled through papers with the air of someone who knew he was fighting a losing battle. "Your Honor," Nina began, "the defendant stands accused of willfully endangering the life of her 10-year-old son through criminal neglect and abandonment. While the child lay unconscious in a hospital ICU, the defendant was posting photos from a luxury vacation in Bali." Judge Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the file. "Ms. Calver, what is the state's position on bail?" "Your Honor, we're requesting the defendant be held without bail. She has already demonstrated a willingness to flee the jurisdiction while her child was in critical condition. She has access to financial resources and no meaningful ties to the community that would ensure her appearance at trial." Mr. Richards' response? The public defender stood slowly. "Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record. These charges, while serious, are based on what appears to be a misunderstanding between estranged parents. Ms. Von Kessler believed her son was being properly cared for during her absence." "By whom?" "We're still investigating the details, Your Honor." Nina stood up. "Your Honor, the defendant cannot name a single person who was supposedly caring for her son. No babysitter, no relative, no family friend. Because no such person exists. Judge Morrison looked at Delaney directly. Ms. Von Kessler, do you understand the charges against you? Delaney's voice was barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. Do you understand that your son was found unconscious and malnourished after being left alone for an extended period? Yes, Your Honor. And during this period, you were in Bali? Yes, but nothing. Ms. Calver, I'm inclined to agree with the state's position. Bail is denied. The gavel came down with a sound like a door slamming shut. Yes, the bailiffs led Delaney away. She turned and scanned the courtroom. When her eyes found Russ, her expression changed from fear to something uglier: anger, resentment, blame. She mouthed two words. I hate you. Russ watched her disappear through the door that led back to the holding cells. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. The story broke on Killamone News that evening. Russ was helping Sawyer with a coloring book when his phone started buzzing with calls from unknown numbers. Local mother arrested for child neglect while on Bali vacation scrolled across the bottom of the television screen. The news anchor, a serious-faced woman named Jennifer Park, delivered the story with barely concealed disgust. Delaney Von Kessler, 38, was arrested at Seattle-Tacoma Airport last night on charges of criminal child endangerment. Police say Von Kessler left her 10-year-old son alone for days while she vacationed in Indonesia. The child was found unconscious from a severe asthma attack and is currently hospitalized. They showed photos lifted from Delaney's social media, the bikini shots, the resort meals, the spa treatments. Then they cut to footage of her being led away in handcuffs. Sources tell KOMO News that Von Kessler spent over $40,000 on luxury travel and shopping while her son was left without food or medical care. Russ turned off the television, but the damage was already spreading. By morning, the story had been picked up by CNN, Fox News, and every major online outlet. #BaliMom was trending on Twitter. The comments were brutal. How do you leave your kid to die while you get tan? That poor little boy. I hope they throw the book at her. 10 years in prison isn't enough for this monster. Within hours, someone had leaked Braylon's identity. Photos of him with Delaney flooded social media, along with his employer information and social media profiles. That Russ's phone rang. Markel, have you seen the news? It's everywhere. Braylon Court just posted a statement on Facebook. He's claiming he had no knowledge of the situation with Sawyer. Says he thought the boy was with relatives. Is anyone buying that? Read the comments on his post. He's getting destroyed. Someone found his LinkedIn profile and started posting screenshots of him and Delaney at expensive restaurants while Sawyer was in the hospital. Russ looked at Sawyer, who was carefully coloring inside the lines of a drawing of a house with smoke coming from the chimney, the kind of house where families lived safely together. What's happening with his job? According to the Seattle Times, his employer put him on administrative leave pending investigation. Apparently, some of those luxury purchases were made with a company credit card. Good. Russ, there's something else. Loretta Vaughn issued a statement through her lawyer. What kind of statement? Though I had no idea kind. Claims she thought Delaney had arranged proper care for Sawyer. Says she's devastated to learn what really happened. She was posting photos of their girls' trip while her grandson was dying. I know, but legally, she didn't do anything criminal. Morally reprehensible, maybe, but not criminal. That afternoon, Joe stopped by with a stack of cards and drawings from other families in the pediatric ward. Word had spread about Sawyer's situation, and the response had been overwhelming. The entire nursing staff is following this story, she said. Everyone's rooting for you both. Any word from the hospital administration? They're being very careful about what they say publicly, but privately? They're furious. We see a lot of difficult family situations, but this one really got to people. Joe sat down next to Sawyer's bed. How are you doing, sweetheart? Better. Dad says I can maybe go home soon. That's wonderful. Are you excited to go home? Sawyer looked at Russ uncertainly. We'll be safe there. It'll be safe, Russ said. I promise. That evening, while Sawyer slept, Russ sat in the hospital cafeteria and read news coverage on his laptop. The story had taken on a life of its own, becoming a symbol of parental selfishness and neglect. But buried in the comments and social media posts, he found something that surprised him. Stories from other kids who'd been left alone, other parents who'd prioritize their own needs over their children's safety. The story was resonating because it wasn't unique, it was just the most extreme version of something that happened more often than anyone wanted to admit. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Please call me. I need to explain. This is all wrong. D." He deleted the message without reading it twice. Family court Judge Barbara Chin's chambers were smaller and less formal than the criminal courtroom, but the weight of the decision being made felt just as significant. Russ sat next to Rebecca Morrison, watching Judge Chun review the thick file of evidence they compiled. "Mr. Kessler, I've read your petition for emergency custody modification. Given the circumstances, I'm inclined to grant your request, but I want to hear from both parties first." Across the room, Delaney sat next to a new lawyer someone expensive her mother had hired, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Landis who specialized in defending wealthy clients in messy divorces. "Your Honor," Rebecca began, "my client is seeking full legal and physical custody of his son, Sawyer Kessler. The evidence shows a clear pattern of neglect and endangerment by the child's mother." She handed Judge Chin a tablet loaded with photos, videos, and documents. "This is Mrs. Patterson's security footage showing the child wandering the neighborhood alone for hours. This is the timeline of missed medical appointments. This is the financial record showing over $40,000 spent on luxury items while the child went without food and medication." Judge Chun studied the tablet, her expression growing darker with each piece of evidence. "Ms. Landis, how does your client respond to these allegations?" "Your Honor, Ms. Von Kessler deeply regrets the miscommunication that led to this situation. She believed her son was being properly cared for in her absence." "By whom?" "We're still investigating." "Ms. Landis, it's been a week since your client was arrested. If there was someone caring for this child, you would have found them by now." "Your Honor, my client has been the primary caregiver for this child for 5 years while Mr. Kessler was working overseas. She's made mistakes, but that doesn't make her an unfit mother." Rebecca stood up. "Your Honor, with respect, nearly allowing your child to die while you vacation in Bali isn't a mistake. It's criminal neglect." Judge Chun held up a hand for silence. "I want to hear from the parties directly. Mr. Kessler, why should I grant you full custody?" Russ had practiced this moment, but sitting here in front of the judge, he found himself speaking from the heart instead of from his prepared notes. "Your Honor, I made a terrible mistake 5 years ago. I let my wife convince me that being a good father meant staying away, letting her have primary custody, not disrupting their routine with my travel schedule." He paused, looking at Delaney for the first time since entering the room. She was staring at her hands, refusing to meet his eyes. "I thought I was doing what was best for Sawyer. I was wrong, and my son nearly died because of that mistake. What's different now? Now I know that being a good father means being present, being involved, being there when your child needs you, not when it's convenient, and you're prepared to provide a stable home environment." "Yes, Your Honor. I have a job here in Seattle, good insurance, stable housing. Most importantly, I have 5 years of regret to make up for." Judge Chun turned to Delaney. "Ms. Von Kessler, do you have anything to say?" Delaney looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Your Honor, I love my son. I made some bad choices, but I never meant for him to get hurt. You left him alone for days. I believed." She stopped, realizing that any explanation would only make things worse. "Your Honor," Ms. Landis interjected, "my client is prepared to accept supervised visitation and mandatory parenting classes in exchange for maintaining some form of custody." Judge Chin closed the file and looked at both parties. "Ms. Von Kessler, you left your 10-year-old son alone while you spent $40,000 on a luxury vacation. Your son was found unconscious, malnourished, and without access to life-saving medication. These aren't bad choices, this is criminal negligence." She turned to her computer and began typing. "I'm granting Mr. Kessler full legal and physical custody of Sawyer Kessler, effective immediately. Ms. Von Kessler's parental rights are hereby terminated." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Delaney let out a sob and buried her face in her hands. "Your Honor," Ms. Landis protested, "termination of parental rights is an extreme measure. So is leaving your child to die while you get a tan. This court's primary concern is the safety and welfare of the child, and the evidence shows clearly that this child is not safe in his mother's care. Judge Chun signed the order with firm strokes of her pen. Mr. Kessler, you have full custody. I'm also issuing a restraining order preventing Ms. Von Kessler from contacting the child directly or indirectly until further order of this court. As they left the courthouse, Russ felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Absolute certainty that he'd done the right thing. Sawyer was safe now. Legally, financially, and physically safe. Delaney was no longer his son's mother. She was just a woman who'd given birth to him and then abandoned him when it became inconvenient. The King County Superior Court was packed for the opening day of State v. Von Kessler. Media outlets filled the back rows, and sketch artists positioned themselves for clear views of the defendant's table. Nina Calver stood at the prosecutor's podium, her opening statement direct and devastating. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about choices. The choice to spend $40,000 on luxury travel while your child eats hoarded granola bars. The choice to post vacation photos while your son lies unconscious in an ICU. The choice to prioritize your own pleasure over your child's life. She clicked a remote, and the courtroom screen filled with side-by-side images. Delaney in a bikini, laughing at a resort poolside, next to a hospital photo of Sawyer unconscious and connected to breathing machines. The defendant made these choices deliberately, repeatedly, and with full knowledge of the consequences. This isn't a case about a parent who made mistakes or fell on hard times. This is a case about criminal negligence. The defense attorney, Patricia Landis, tried to paint a different picture in her opening statement. My client is a loving mother who found herself overwhelmed by the responsibilities of single parenthood. Yes, she made errors in judgment, but these errors don't rise to the level of criminal behavior. But as the trial progressed, the evidence was overwhelming. Mrs. Patterson testified about finding Sawyer unconscious, about watching him wander the neighborhood alone for weeks. The videos from her security camera played on the courtroom screen, showing a small boy trying desperately to get into his own house while his mother partied thousands of miles away. Dr. Chin testified about the pattern of missed appointments, refused treatments, and expired medications. Her testimony was clinical and devastating. The child was suffering from preventable medical complications because his caregiver chose not to provide basic medical care. Joe took the stand and described finding Sawyer in the ICU, malnourished and fighting for his life. In 20 years of pediatric nursing, I've never seen a clearer case of willful neglect. This child was abandoned by someone who was supposed to protect him. Avery Redden presented the CPS investigation findings, documenting weeks of abandonment and neglect. The evidence shows a pattern of escalating abandonment, culminating in the defendant leaving the country while her child was left alone without food, medication, or adult supervision. But it was the financial evidence that sealed Delaney's fate. Nina presented a detailed timeline showing exactly how much money Delaney had spent on herself while Sawyer went without basic necessities. $43,000 in 6 weeks. Designer clothes, luxury hotels, expensive restaurants, first-class flights. All while her son was rationing food and couldn't refill his life-saving medication. The defense tried to argue that Delaney had arranged care that fell through, but they couldn't produce a single witness to support this claim. They tried to paint Russ as a vindictive ex-husband, but the medical evidence spoke for itself. On the final day of testimony, Nina called her last witness, Detective Vasquez, who had investigated the financial trail. We traced every transaction, every credit card purchase, every withdrawal. The defendant spent more on a single dinner in Bali than she had budgeted for her son's food for an entire month. In your professional opinion, Detective Vasquez, was this a case of poor judgment or criminal neglect? Based on the evidence, this was deliberate and willful abandonment. The defendant made conscious choices to prioritize her own pleasure over her child's survival. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. On the charge of child endangerment in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of criminal mistreatment in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of abandonment of a dependent person, how do you find? Guilty. Delaney collapsed in her chair, sobbing. Ms. Landis put a hand on her shoulder, but there was nothing left to say. Judge Morrison scheduled sentencing for the following week. Ms. Von Kessler, you'll remain in custody until sentencing. As the bailiffs led her away, Delaney turned and looked directly at Russ, who was sitting in the gallery. Her expression was pure hatred, not remorse, not shame, but anger at being held accountable. Outside the courthouse, Nina spoke to the gathered reporters. This verdict sends a clear message that children cannot be abandoned for personal convenience. The jury saw through the defense's attempts to minimize this defendant's actions and recognize them for what they were: criminal neglect that nearly cost a child his life. Russ didn't speak to the media. He had nothing to say to them that the evidence hadn't already said more clearly. A week later, Judge Morrison sentenced Delaney to 9 years in state prison, eligible for parole in 5 years. Ms. Von Kessler, you had every advantage: financial resources, education, access to support systems. You chose to abandon your child anyway. This sentence reflects the seriousness of your crimes and the need to protect other children from similar neglect. Delaney was led away in shackles. Russ watched her go, feeling nothing but relief that she could never hurt Sawyer again. 3 months after the sentencing, Russ was pushing Sawyer on the swings at a waterfront park when he saw Loretta Vaughn approaching across the grass. She looked older than he remembered, her usually perfect appearance disheveled and uncertain. "Sawyer, why don't you go try the monkey bars?" Russ suggested. "Okay, Dad." Sawyer ran off, his laugh carrying on the breeze. Loretta stopped a few feet away, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Russ, Loretta, you look well. Both of you. We are well." She watched Sawyer navigate the monkey bars with growing confidence. He's gotten so big. He's healthy, properly fed, regular medical care, consistent routine. Amazing what that does for a kid. Loretta flinched. "Russ, I need to talk to you about Sawyer." "No, please. Just listen." "No. Whatever you're about to say, the answer is no. I'm his grandmother. You're a woman who watched him die while your daughter got a tan. That's not fair. I didn't know. You knew exactly what was happening. You saw the photos Delaney posted. You saw the timestamps. You knew she'd left Sawyer alone, and you chose to say nothing." Loretta's composure cracked. "I made a mistake. I should have." "You should have what? Called CPS? Called me? Called anyone who might have saved a 10-year-old boy from starving to death. I thought Delaney had arranged. Stop lying. Even to yourself. Stop lying." Sawyer ran back to them, slightly out of breath but smiling. "Dad, did you see how far I made it?" "I saw. That was amazing." Sawyer noticed Loretta for the first time. "Grandma." Loretta's face lit up. "Hi, sweetheart. I've missed you so much. Where have you been?" Before Loretta could answer, Russ put his hand on Sawyer's shoulder. "Buddy, why don't you go feed the ducks? There's bread in the car." "Can I?" "Of course." As Sawyer ran toward the water, Russ turned back to Loretta. "Please," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know I made mistakes, but I love that boy. He's all I have left. You should have thought about that before you chose to enable his neglect. I can help. I have money, resources. I can provide." "What?" "The same kind of supervision you provided when he almost died. That's not fair." "Fair?" Russ's voice was deadly quiet. "You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been you calling me when you knew Delaney was leaving him alone. Fair would have been you staying home with your grandson instead of going to Bali. Fair would have been you being a grandmother instead of a party companion. I can't change what happened. No, you can't. And I can't trust you with his safety. I'm not asking for custody. Just visitation. A chance to be part of his life." Russ looked at Sawyer, who was happily throwing bread to a group of ducks by the water. His son was laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months. You were part of his life. You chose to be part of the life that nearly killed him. "Russ, please. You made your choice, Loretta. You chose your daughter's happiness over your grandson's life. Now you get to live with that choice." He started walking toward Sawyer, then stopped and turned back. "You're not a grandmother. You're just someone who used to be important to him before you proved you couldn't be trusted with what mattered." "Russ." Stay away from us, Loretta. Stay away from my son. He walked to the water's edge, where Sawyer was feeding the last of the bread to an eager group of ducks. Ready to head home, but yeah, can we stop and get ice cream? Absolutely. As they walked back to the car, Sawyer looked over his shoulder. Is Grandma coming with us? No, buddy. She's not. Oh, okay. The boy didn't ask why, and Russ was grateful for that. Someday, when Sawyer was older, he might want to understand what had happened during those dark months. When that day came, Russ would tell him the truth. But for now, it was enough that Sawyer was safe, healthy, and learning to trust again that the adults in his life would protect him instead of abandoning him. 1 year later, Russ stood in the doorway of Sawyer's new bedroom, watching his son carefully install an air filtration system they'd ordered online. The boy's hands were steady now, his movements confident. The scared, malnourished child from the hospital was gone, replaced by a healthy 11-year-old who was learning that home meant safety. Their new house sat on a bluff overlooking Puget Sound, modest but comfortable. 3 bedrooms, a yard where Sawyer could play safely, neighbors who waved when they passed. It was the kind of house where families lived normal lives. Hand me that screwdriver, Dad. Russ passed him the tool and watched as Sawyer tightened the final connection. The air filter hummed to life, its green light indicating clean air flowing into the room. Perfect, Sawyer said, stepping back to admire his work. My lungs are going to love this. Think it'll help with your breathing. Dr. Chun says it should, especially during allergy season. They'd found a new pediatrician closer to their new home, but they still saw Dr. Chun for Sawyer's asthma management. The boy's health had improved dramatically over the past year. Regular meals, consistent medication, proper medical care, and most importantly, the kind of stability that let a child's body heal from chronic stress. Dad, yeah, buddy, you always show up now. The words hit Russ with surprising force. Simple words from a child who'd learned not to count on the adults in his life. That's what fathers do, even when it's hard, even when you're tired, especially when I'm tired, even when I'm sick, especially when you're sick. Sawyer nodded solemnly, filing this information away with the other truths he was learning about what family actually meant. They went downstairs together, where Jo was setting out dinner on the kitchen table. She'd started visiting once a week, initially to check on Sawyer's medical progress, but gradually becoming something more, not a replacement for the mother who'd abandoned him, but a consistent adult presence who cared about his well-being. How's the air filter working? She asked. Perfect, Sawyer said. Dad helped me install it. Of course he did. Over dinner, Sawyer talked about school, about his friends, about the science project he was working on about water purification systems. He was thriving in ways that went beyond physical health. His confidence was returning, his natural curiosity reasserting itself. After dinner, Jo helped Sawyer with his homework while Russ cleaned the kitchen. It was a routine they developed, comfortable and predictable. The kind of routine that helped a traumatized child believe that tomorrow would be safe too. As the evening wound down, Russ stepped outside onto the deck, overlooking the water. The sound was calm tonight, reflecting the lights from the city across the water. He'd lost everything once: his marriage, his relationship with his son, his sense of what it meant to be a father. But he'd gained something more valuable. The knowledge that being present mattered more than being perfect, that consistency mattered more than convenience, that love meant showing up even when it was inconvenient. His phone buzzed with a text from Markel. Delaney's parole hearing is scheduled for next year. Thought you should know. Russ deleted the message without responding. Delaney was part of a past that no longer had any power over their future. She'd made her choices and faced the consequences. Now, she was just another stranger who'd once been important. Dad, Sawyer appeared beside him on the deck. What are you looking at? Just thinking. About what? About how much better everything is now. Sawyer leaned against the railing next to him. Do you think Mom will ever come back? It was the first time in months that Sawyer had mentioned Delaney directly. I don't know, buddy, but I know you're safe now. Because you're here. Because I'm here. And because I'm never leaving again. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the lights of Seattle twinkle across the dark water. A father and son who'd found each other again, who'd learned that family wasn't about biology or legal documents, but about showing up day after day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Russ put his arm around Sawyer's shoulders and felt the boy lean into him, solid and warm and alive. A child who'd learned to trust again because someone had finally proven themselves trustworthy. Behind them, the house glowed with warm light. The air filter hummed quietly in Sawyer's room, and everything was exactly as it should be. Safe. Stable. Home.